Welcome. We are really excited today to be able to talk to this precious woman who I know quite well personally. And it's just such an honor to have her with us. And she is our very first Grief Talk interview.
That's
and
right.
So we are delighted. And we wanted you as our first choice, our first interview. So I'm just really happy to have you here today. And I'd like to introduce everybody to Marci Glidden Savage. And I'm going to kind of read an intro, and then I'm going to tell you how I know her. So Marci's husband of 34 years died by suicide in August 2014. And in March 2019, her second husband of 8 months also died by suicide. Both husbands were 58 years young when they died, and both were asymptomatic for the unseen deadly depression and dangerous anxiety lying within. In the grip of unrelenting pain and with dogged determination, Marci meets grief head on. This is the book that we're talking about, that we're going to be speaking about today, and she does this in her book. With candid openness, she opens the door into her personal story of lost love, betrayal, abandonment, shattered dreams, and unanswered questions. Marci uses her grief and sets out to expose. I'm sorry, this is tough. Marci uses her grief and sets out to expose the ill-conceived and biased attitudes toward mental illnesses, standing in the way and keeping many individuals battling depression and anxiety from seeking help, particularly men. From the first page, her riveting, original, and profoundly moving open letter to mental illness exposes the insidious way it torments and holds captive its victims under the guise of silence, and why no one could see the end coming. Twice. Marci's story is unbelievable. And this is her book right here. And no one saw it coming. And if you notice, look at all the stickies that Ron has put in this and notes that we have taken, because we just found this such a riveting book. And we're gonna talk about Marci's experience and some of what she has in here. But I couldn't put this book down. And as Ron and I were saying when we met with Marci yesterday for lunch, which was a lovely lunch, it's the kind of book that you need to read more than one time. And I know Marci because we have a mutual friend, and I actually, her friend was at my house when Marci's first husband, Paul, died. And I remember her dropping to the floor when she got the call. And that's my first introduction to Marci. And then as time went on, got to know her a little better. She helped me with my book, her perspective on suicide, helping me understand the loved ones left behind. And then after the death of her second husband, she actually attended one of my retreats, and we became forever friends there.
And I lucked out because now I have a new friend as well. And I will say that I was very touched by your book. It's a very readable book, and at the same time is very dense. It's dense in the sense that there's a great deal within it. And so it would be very easy to miss some of the most key points in the book, I think, if someone doesn't take the time to either read it very slowly, which I did not. I powered through it. And then as I began to look back at it, it was like, wow, there is just more and more in this book. And as a therapist, and if we have any therapists watching right now, and you want to understand more about grief, and specifically on the topics of suicide, but also related to widowhood and so forth, there's an incredible amount of great information in here for you that would inform you for your practice. So I highly recommend it to professionals as well. Because there's so many topics in here, what I'm thinking, maybe what we could do is focus first on just the topic of suicide and your experiences with it, Marci, if that sounds good to you.
That's wonderful. And I'm so thankful to be here. Really thankful. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you and your viewing audience. That's my passion and my mission going forward in life is to share my story. So thank you, both of you. My old friend and my new friend.
Forever friends, we hope.
Forever friends.
Yeah.
We touched on this a little bit yesterday too, and it's just this topic of stigma. A lot of the stigma that goes along when someone dies by suicide, and a lot of it, in my mind, has to do with ignorance. We just don't know that much about it. And I think we keep it more quiet than we should keep it quiet. And therefore, it's always this mysterious thing that is out there. And subsequently, we fill in the blanks, and then we have some wrong perceptions about suicide. I'd love to know what kind of stigma that you ran into personally or that your family talked about. And just go with that. Anything that comes up for you in that zone.
I appreciate that question because the stigma surrounding a death by suicide is completely different. And a stigma, is centuries old. And it comes from a Greek word meaning like a brand. And they used to brand criminals in what they considered mentally insane. Centuries ago, and it has just perpetuated. It's archaic, but it's still here, and I felt, and my children felt every ounce of it, questioning their dad or my husband's character, certainly questioning their judgment. I mean, coward, selfish people that we had known and do know for long periods of time, who knew, certainly my first husband, and all of a sudden, because of one dark hour, his life was reevaluated. And that I don't believe is right. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right. And I think that we can do better and must do better, or the suicide rate is going to continue to flourish.
And it is.
Yes.
Marci, you explained that so well, and you opened my eyes about that stigma. I had never thought about it until you introduced me to that. And now it makes complete sense to me. Can you tell us, what does it feel like to be on the receiving end? I mean, grief is hard enough. Loss is hard enough, but now you've got this added to it. So how did that make you feel?
I'm not sure that there's anything more isolating than feeling those stigmas. Because once you know that it's around you, like you said, grief, just regular grief, pure, unadulterated grief is hard.
Yeah.
But when you know that people are questioning the death, and they want to ask you, were there marital problems? Did you have financial problems? I mean, unbelievable questions that normally someone doesn't get. If you've lost a husband or a wife by any other means, most people are walking in your door just loving on you, and I'm so sorry, and they don't have a question for you except that just to tell you that they're sorry. But I remember a phone call to my attorney the very next morning after Paul died. It was within 24 hours. And our attorney, who had known us for 30 years, first question out of his mouth was, did you guys have financial problems I wasn't aware of? His thought was not to say, Marci, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say. I had a gentleman that took care of my pool.
I remember this from the book.
And 3 weeks after Paul died, I had enough guts to walk outside and say hi to him. Instead of saying, Marci, I'm so sorry, or how are you doing? His question to me was, do you think that Paul's in heaven? And I think that's the the first time I felt how different this death was.
Yes.
And I have felt it every day since.
That's a fairly common misperception too, even for people who are lifelong Christians and so forth, as
Yes.
the unforgivable sin type thing. But that is just not the case. And there really isn't anything scripturally that would support that stance.
That's absolutely right. There's 11 or 12, and forgive me if I don't know which one that is, actual deaths by suicide in the Bible. And you're
That's
absolutely
right.
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
There is not God seems to be quiet on that, and there's not this condemnation. There are, the deaths are laid out scripturally, and how and why, but there's no condemnation. And, with the pool guy, I thought, well, maybe he just, doesn't know scripture well, or, I kind of tried to feel sorry for him for asking me the question. But as time went on, and particularly after I lost my second husband, and all I saw around me was the stigma and the anger and people saying what a coward he was. I can't imagine that anybody would have said, had either Paul or Michael battled cancer for 4 or 5 years, and then decided at the end, I'm tired, and let's just not take any more chemo, or let's just, I just can't imagine anybody saying, what a coward they were, that they just, didn't want to live anymore. Those things just don't happen.
In your book, because it really follows a storyline. So we know, after reading the book, of course, about the background there. So wise to do that, because you really get to see the man. And not a perfect person. And he did have some of his own issues and struggles. But obviously there was more going on there than you knew, because he was being strong and holding things in at a certain point. But I think it's important to note that people who are really otherwise show so many strengths, such a gift to the world. It reminds me of an experience I had just this past year. And this was a woman who was here for our intensive retreats that we do for grief stricken people. And her main issue, was that her husband had died by suicide, and she had discovered him completely shocked, saw nothing in there that would have clued her into any of that, which is pretty much what we see from people anyway, is that it's always a shock. Virtually no one says, oh, well, sure, I saw that coming. Obviously they did not see it coming. And her comment was so similar to yours, Marci, which is, it bothers me so much that this is how I feel like people are remembering my husband, when he was also 50 some years old. When all these years, he was a fabulous father. He was a wonderful husband. He was an incredible artsy person. He had so much to give and affected so many people around him. And then that happened. And then she worries that people will remember him that way. And probably some people will remember him that way. And it's a tragedy.
I agree 100% with her. I know that feeling. I felt the feeling the night I found Paul. I wanted to protect him. I had been married almost 35 years, crazy in love, been together 40 years. And I wanted to protect him, his image, this is the last thing I wanted anybody to remember him for, was this.
People ask you the question, Did you have any warning signs? Did you see it coming? And the impact that that question had on you,
Mhm.
what it brought up in you and how it made you feel. Can you share what that question did to you?
Well, if I if I had seen anything at all that I believed that either Paul or Michael were in danger of harming themselves, I'd have walked through fire to stop it. I'd have done anything. The warning signs that are typically on suicide prevention websites and the National Institute of Mental Health of severe depression or giving your things away, talking about feeling helpless, don't normally happen in those that actually
Right.
die by suicide. They just, neither one of mine were. In fact, part of that cycle of a few days before, some scientists talk about, there's a euphoria about them. And I will tell you in both cases, well, certainly in Paul's case, the 5 days before were some of our best days ever in our marriage. So you don't see those. And it makes the family and those left behind feel like, are you saying we're responsible?
Right.
Are you saying that why
thought about that.
it's part of our fault? But it's not.
No.
It's not. But that's how it feels. It absolutely feels as though our love for them, our integrity, is being questioned.
I never thought of it till you shared that. So this is why I think this conversation that we're having with you, and I'm sure that anybody who has had that similar experience of losing a loved one to suicide, I'm sure they can relate. Absolutely. And I hope that that's going to be comforting to them, and that for the rest of us, you're opening our eyes and educating us. Thank you. Okay. So we got lots of questions here.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Where do you want to go next?
You know what? I'd love to read this excerpt from your book.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why after I read it. Survivors of suicide long for one more conversation, one more kiss, and one more chance to say, I love you. Suicide is a game changer. Your loved one's life is reevaluated, judged, and at a minimum questioned. Curiosity replaces compassion, and anger replaces love, robbing you of the opportunity for unalloyed grief. You were talking about that earlier before,
Right.
that you don't get to grieve quite the same as other people grieve.
No,
And
you don't.
you're robbed of because grieving is actually an experience by which we heal. And so you're robbed of the normalcy of that. And it becomes a more, what I've always called a different death, because people treat it differently, and they treat the family behind differently.
I would, ask anyone who's been widowed, anyone who's lost a spouse. I venture to say most everyone would say how difficult it is. And it took years to process and get over. And it is it's number one on the stress scale, losing a spouse.
Right.
Everything in your life changes. And I might say, loss is loss, but when you lose a parent, when you lose a sibling, when you lose even a child, not everything in your life changes. But when you lose a spouse, everything from where you park in the garage to where you eat dinner, if you eat dinner, to your, big things like social calendars, everything changes. because you're no longer part of a duo.
Right.
And it doesn't change in all of those other death experiences. Not everything changes because you typically have someone to go through it with.
Right.
Your partner that you wanted to go through life with, and certainly when you're at your worst point, isn't there anymore. Isn't there to say, we'll get through it together. We'll do it together. You can say that when a parent dies or other deaths, but losing a spouse is very different.
Yes, it is.
Very, very different. So you take that and then you layer on top a manner of death that catches everybody off guard. It is and all of the questions and the speculations that come with it is just this other layer of horrible pain that you now have to get through that also. Not just the grief of losing a loved one, but now you've got this whole other, it's like Dante's Inferno, this whole nother level that you've got to navigate. And there's no map, there's no book that tells you how to do that very well at all. It's just, it adds.
I can't imagine, because I know, and I can't speak for Ron, but I'm sure it's very similar. And we work with widows and a lot, and losing my husband was a pain I never, ever imagined possible. I'm sure that anybody who's lost a spouse, and I know that it's unimaginable pain when you lose other people as well. So I don't mean they're all awful and unimaginable. But you had said something, again, when we were talking yesterday at lunch, that you wish you could have had Ron's and my grief. Like, that's yours is the grief I wanted. And I didn't take that offensively at all. It made perfect sense to me that what you were saying is, your grief was awful, right? But at least it was somewhat normal, even though it's awful. But mine, take what you felt and then add this onto it. And
well, just think, as you both sit there, having experienced the death of a spouse, would you want that extra layer?
Didn't want the first layer. I didn't want that. You keep thinking it can't be worse than this. It's and you can't even describe it until you've been through it. You don't think it's possible to hurt that much. And so when I think about how much I hurt, and I bet you would relate to this too, Ron, and then you add that layer to it. And this is why, we have so much to talk about, because you have to see how far Marci has come. This is why we wanted to talk to you, because your message, even though this is tragic and this is awful, is one of hope. Yeah. Because and we haven't gotten there yet, but we're going to. So stay tuned. You have to stay tuned.
Yes.
Okay.
I know that. Well, I told my little story of the woman whose husband had died from suicide. And she had no answers. And I think you dedicated a chapter, did you not, to the question why?
Yes.
Talk about that, if you will, a little bit. What's that like you want some closure of some sort, but you never maybe really get it?
Well, I wanted to know why I didn't see it coming.
Oh.
Why, after 40 years of knowing someone and living life with them, that I didn't see it coming. Did I know that there was times of depression and anxiety? Absolutely. But your mind just doesn't allow you to believe that a loved one would die by suicide. You just, you think, well, eventually we're going to get old, or we're going to, I know cancer, we're gonna have a heart attack with something, but you just, even when you know that they're struggling, you just don't, you never believe that that's really going to be the case.
Right.
Mhm.
And you certainly hope that if it is, that they would say something. And so that I decided to go on, was looking for answers, just like everybody else.
Right.
Mhm.
And so I did a lot of research and I read a lot of books and wanted to know why it's possible that we don't see it
Mhm.
and what we can do about that. Because I want to be part, I think, as I told you guys yesterday, I'm not satisfied with just being a survivor. I want to be a part of the solution to this epidemic.
Mhm. Could you address that? Because you said it yesterday. It's very common to be called a survivor of suicide.
Mhm.
And you said, no, I don't like that. And can you explain that you're feeling about that?
Well, I think surviving is just that, just surviving. It doesn't mean thriving or, really living. It's just, okay, wow, I got through that, kind of like this.
Right.
And I didn't want to be pigeonholed, basically, to that mentality of just surviving. I didn't want that to now be my story, that all I did was survive this.
Right.
My life did not end that day, those days. My kids' lives didn't end.
Right.
Mhm.
And our lives were separate from theirs. And, you know, uh, we wanted to live and tell our story. And so I don't like the term survivor. I don't refer to myself as a suicide survivor. I've not joined any groups or done any marches because I believe that we're way more than that. And that's part of the problem, is that people are just surviving this. We've got to put an end to it.
Yes.
And we have to be on top of our game to do that. And we need to shed some of those, like I'm trying to shed coward and selfish from the deceased.
Mhm.
I really want to shed survivor from us.
Mm.
I'm the same person. I mean, I'm Marci. My life imploded, but I'm still Marci, and my kids are still who they are.
Mhm.
And we were blessed beyond measure to have Paul as a husband and as a father. And I'm not going to let this an hour just, I'm not going to let that define their lives either. They shouldn't.
Totally agree.
Oh, you're doing great. Thank you.
Uh,
Okay.
I wanted to ask this question too, because I think, Marcy, that you can really shed some light on this, and that is that suicide is not a choice.
Mhm.
I'd like to, could you expand on that a little bit? Because I remember reading it at first and it really made me think. And I think it made me think because I guess I've always thought of it as being a choice. But as soon as I read that statement and gave it some more thought, and I'm probably a little further down the line than most people in understanding some of these things, I thought, wow, that shouldn't be a revolutionary thought to me at my age and time in the profession and all that type of thing. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I did, like I said, I did a lot of research, and most would say that the statistics and everything that they know about it leads to the fact that it really isn't a choice. I mean, when things go wrong in your brain, just like they go wrong in your heart,
Mhm.
depression and mental illness can, I believe, obscure reality in ways that if you've never experienced it, if you've never experienced severe depression,
Right.
we don't know what that's like. Like if you've never, had a heart attack, you don't know what that's like.
Right.
And to assume that we do is not fair. I believe that it is a place in their minds that they go to where, like I say in the letter, that the love of family, of friends, and of life itself can't be seen or heard. They're not making logical choice.
Right.
Not like we're sitting here and,
Right.
okay, all of a sudden I'm just mad and I just want to check out on everybody. That's not what really happens. Statistics or researchers have seen that typically it's within less than an hour from the thought. So a lot of people think, well, they've planned it, they've thought about it for a long time. Perhaps those that have sought help and will seek help are those that maybe have, put some planning because they really don't want to do it.
Right.
Mhm.
But in the mind, just like I would say, like maybe in a heart attack, when all of a sudden maybe a valve, that last piece of cholesterol just shuts everything off,
Right.
causing that heart attack. I believe that all of the chemicals in the brain, along with the environmental and psychological things that have happened in their life, it all comes to a head, and there's no rationality at all. They're
It's
not saying, I'm choosing this.
such a great point. So
Mhm.
if you educated me about anything in your book, that was one. And admittedly, I looked at it and I thought, well, I should know this, because if you think of these silent killing things, and we know when we work with people that do have various and different mental illnesses,
Mhm.
uh, and you look at them, well, they look just like another guy and like another woman, but in truth, we can't expect them to act in the way that somebody's in a really healthy mental place. They're not going
Right.
to act that way. That would be ridiculous to think that, but we make these assumptions.
Mhm.
And I think unless we educate people along those lines, they would never know. And that's a big frustration when people don't act the way that we think that they should.
Mhm.
That's because we don't know what it is that's driving the reason that they're behaving that way. If we
Absolutely.
knew,
Right.
you're right, we could do something about it potentially.
So I would just follow that by saying that's the importance of getting rid of the stigma.
Right.
Because if you had an opportunity to have some individuals that have died by suicide as a client, maybe if we didn't have the stigma, they would have been clients of someone. And then you could look into, I love to sit down with Paul and say, please tell me, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
What were you thinking? But because of the stigma, those people don't seek help. So yes, we all want to know, and let's know, and let's save some more lives. Let's get rid of the stigma. So we have an insight.
I'm curious to know how you feel towards Paul and Michael with this. What are all the feelings that have come up for you with this? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that could relate to it. And I would think there'd be all sorts of different emotions.
There are. Ooh. Well, losing someone by this method takes a pretty significant hit on your self-esteem,
Mhm.
your self-worth.
Mm.
I'm sure it's typical of most. I mean, I've said it to myself many times. Was I not lovable enough?
Mhm.
Was was there? I clearly I didn't say what I needed, or I didn't love him the way he needed to be loved. You think in your grief, you think those things.
Right.
When you're just raw emotion, and that's all it is. And the thoughts in your head are going 50 miles an hour. And I've had anger, um, particularly over the fact that I'm watching my kids grieve.
Mhm.
Not anger over my grief. I chose both men. I loved both men. And some people have said to me, boy, you didn't sign up for that. And I've said, yes, I did. I signed up the day I married him.
Mhm.
In sickness and in health, that isn't just mild health. I don't think we think about that when we're standing there, but I did sign up. I absolutely did. I said I was going to love them through anything and everything. And maybe my biggest regret is that I wasn't there in their worst moment.
Mm.
I didn't have the opportunity to be there. That's it.
And that of what I have seen so often is people were like, why didn't I come home earlier? Or, all these different things. And it's like,
Right.
in part because they were making a decision, and maybe you did come home at other times when something was on his mind. You
That's right.
don't know.
Yeah.
So
No.
it's just an impossible situation. You couldn't possibly have prevented it in that way,
No.
nor can anyone else.
No.
Otherwise, as you say, when people go forward with this act, they are not in a place where they're really thinking in a real rational way. They're not seeing the world the way that the rest of us are. They're in so much psychological pain at that point
Mhm.
that seems like the right thing to do. So if you can put yourself in that person's head, though, anybody who's watching this,
Mhm.
realize that that person is in such pain that they will do anything to end it in that moment. And
And
they
most
do.
of us have never felt that kind of pain.
Right.
That's
Where I just got to end this. And um, and like I said, not being there in that moment was not that I had any power. I don't have the power to change destiny. That's way above my pay grade. But but not be there to hold their hand so they weren't alone.
Mhm.
How many times do you hear, when you hear that someone's lost someone, and they're quick to say, surrounded by family and friends.
Mm.
They
Yeah.
took their last breath. Someone was there to hold their hand. Someone was there to kiss them. They heard you say, I love you in those last moments. I'd have given anything to be the last voice or the hand that they felt.
Right.
Just at that level, not that I could change, although I would have wanted to, but just that they didn't die alone in
That's a
such
great distinction.
traumatic ways.
Hmm.
Just didn't want it. Mm-mm.
Hmm.
Do you want to talk about the trauma at all of that was
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it for a minute here,
Just for-
whatever. This was obviously a very traumatic thing for you, both with Paul and with Michael. Different kind of traumatic experience, but nevertheless, I don't know how anyone could go through what you did and not feel traumatized to some extent. People are traumatized over much less severe incidents.
Yeah.
And how were you able to move from the point where you have even images, visual images in your mind that I think you said yesterday, I couldn't shut my eyes, because if I shut my eyes, I would see that, to the point where you are now. How did that go for you? How did that change?
Well, the trauma part, and I appreciate you asking that question. I don't get asked that question a lot. Very few people have asked me about the trauma of finding Paul.
Yeah.
And, they want to ask all kinds of other questions. But one of the most significant questions to ask me would be about that trauma. And so I appreciate that. It was the most terrifying thing that I've experienced. And again, after, being married and being with someone for 40 years, to have that as your last image is difficult. As I say in the book, I didn't even realize what had happened when I walked out into the backyard. I thought he'd fallen asleep, because it took me a moment to realize what had happened. And I literally couldn't even get a scream out. I was so terrified that I was literally afraid to touch him. I was just terrified, and did touch him and realized how cold he was. And that's when I went back in the house, and I had a landline at the time, and I was shaking so bad I couldn't even dial.
Yeah.
And I just know that the person on the other end of the phone, just heard me screaming. And, from there, it just kind of went into slow motion. But literally for, 48 hours or more, I couldn't shut my eyes, because the moment I did, that's the only image I saw, was that. And I had someone kind of walk me through that, trying to help me. I couldn't go out in the backyard for months. I couldn't. It was probably 4 years and a move later that I was able to visit that vision only when I wanted to,
Yes.
and not just pop. It took a lot. It took a lot. And it was typically when I was alone, when I was with people, not so much. But I've come to a place now where, again, if I want to go visit it, I can, but it doesn't control, it doesn't just pop up for me. And I'm very thankful for that, because the trauma of that was just, wouldn't wish on anybody.
And the way that you described it makes so much sense, because the big shift there is you haven't forgotten it.
No.
It's not like it went away, but you now have come to a point where you're consciously in control of this.
Right.
And it's not like you're the victim to something that you can't stop.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
You've made that turn. And for anybody watching this who's struggling with that, I would want to make this point, and that is, there are therapies out there that are specifically designed to help people move that part of a memory. It's not like erasing something from your mind. It's desensitizing the event, and there's more to it than I'm going to say right here, but at the end of the day, the idea is that shift is there. And I personally experienced this, maybe at a smaller level, but the idea is having things come into your mind that are unpleasant, that are intrusive. You don't want them there. There are ways that you can be worked through that. And I talk about that in different episodes that we have on our website. But I would want you to know that, because you don't have to live with that.
Right.
It does take time. It does take a little bit of time, but maybe less than people might think.
Mhm. But again, I appreciate you even asking me.
Oh, it's a
Yeah.
doozy.
I think this is the first time I've been able to really verbalize, actually, that deep down inside, I wish people would have asked me more about that. And they haven't. So I appreciate it.
So as I was talking about to you viewers out there, and we're thinking about the idea of having been through something that's traumatic, and you find that certain things will trigger a post-traumatic effect on you. And that could be an emotional thing, but it can also be certain thoughts that are intrusive, certain images that are intrusive. In other words, that they come up, but you really don't want them. And they're packed with emotion. They're usually packed with other things as well, but that's a little bit more than we can get into here. What I would like to tell you is about a particular methodology. It has the initials EMDR. It has something to do with eye movement. But in actuality, now that this method has been researched more and practiced for at least 2 or 3 decades, we find that we can really help people a lot with it. So remember those letters, EMDR. You can Google it and read more about it, but it's a very powerful, but yet a very simple approach to helping people work through traumatic images that they've got.
And you had your own successful experience for yourself, but with clients too that we've worked with, for those, as we help them process the grief itself, but then sometimes there's those images that they're
Yes.
left with. And then Ron can do some EMDR, and we've really seen tremendous results. So
Yes.
there are tools out there, and I'm hoping that this is going to be the message that they get from our time together, Marci, too. If anyone's early on in this journey and all that, and you're just wondering, will life ever be good again? We want to leave them with that message of hope, that there are things to help you. There is an opportunity for things to get better, but it's really hard to feel that way for a long time.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Marci, because I think that there's things that we may not know to ask you, I would just like you to take a couple of seconds and minutes and think about, what would you want people to know who have lost a loved one to suicide? Is there something that that you think that they should know, that you could share with them, or what do you wish you knew? And just anything. I just want to make sure we don't, skip some good golden nuggets here of information.
Well, I would want them to know, number one, how sorry I am for their loss. I would want them to know that they're not alone. It may seem like you're alone because so many times these types of deaths are underreported, or simply families just shut down and don't allow the manner of death to be known. But you're not alone. And if you choose to heal, you will and you can. This legacy does not need to stay with you. You're not imprisoned by it. It feels like it right now, but we're going to work, and I'm going to work really hard to try to destigmatize this whole thing, so that what you're feeling right now doesn't need to be. And I want you to know there are many of us that have felt the sting and are living with it. But like with anything else, we have a choice to make. Either we can be part of the solution, or we can just be part of the status quo. But I know I've been through it twice, that you can heal, you will heal, and joy will return in an abundance. I read, and forgive me that I can't quote it right now, but when grief expands your heart. It pushes your heart into like a bubble that's going to burst. You think it's going to burst.
Mhm.
The good news for that is that it has stretched so much that it has so much more room for love to return and joy and happiness. Choose it. Do the work, do the hard work, but do it because you can.
Mm.
I'm so glad you brought that up too, right?
Yeah, I think can we talk a little bit about the healing journey? Because she's kind of led into it here.
Yeah.
I think if we go
I
with
think
that.
that's a
is
great
that,
idea.
And I do, it's really important again, especially for those who are watching that are thinking it'll never be better than it is right now. It's awful. And I remember those days early on. You can't even fathom that it could be different. There's no way. And that's okay if that's where you're at. That's fine. There's a time and a place absolutely to be there. But what we noticed yesterday, and that's why I want to give this message of hope, is that the three of us were having lunch and we've all had devastating losses. We know what it's like. I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to go on. This pain is too much. We've all been there. We've experienced it in our own way. But yesterday at lunch, it was a table, and Marci said it well. It was a table full of joy.
It was.
So much
It was
joy
great.
as we were talking about grief and loss and these serious subjects, but such joy because we have experienced healing. We really have. And I've experienced exactly what Marci said. Grief opened up a deeper place in me. It was awful when it was filled with pain, but now it's a deeper place of the good feelings. So it's powerful. So hold on, just hold on and have hope. And as we ask you about your healing journey, Marci, you said yesterday, the most important thing that you did towards healing was to give yourself
Permission to heal.
to give yourself.
I said this recently also in front of another group of psychologists. And as I looked around the room and I said, you can tell me every time I come here to heal. And you can give me ideas on how to do that. And you can show me things. But bottom line is, if I don't choose it myself, then you get stuck in this, like I said yesterday, non-productive place of grief. It's just not doing anybody any good. But once you give yourself permission, because eventually, you will feel the simultaneous sadness and happiness, and you will feel this dichotomy of emotions and I think people get stuck because maybe they feel like, oh, wait a minute, I kind of felt pretty good today. That gave me a little joy. How can that possibly be? I'm grieving. People are going to say, why is she so happy? How can you be happy? Your husband just passed away 6 months ago or 2 years ago or whatever it is. Those emotions will creep their way in. And when they do, that's your choice. You either shut them down and you stay mired because you think that you should, or people think that you should, or you can say, that felt pretty good. And I really kind of do want to live again. And you have to say, it's okay. I said, Marci, there's no question that you loved these men. There's no question that I gave them everything and would have done everything for them. And there's no question I fulfilled my vows. But they're not here anymore. And again, I didn't die that day. My world imploded, but I didn't die. And so I said, I want to live. I want to be available for my children and my grandchildren. I want to show people that it's possible to heal. How am I even going to talk about this unless I walk the talk? And so I had to say it's okay. And you've got to shut out all of those other people in your head, or your thoughts that people are going to say, wow, did she get over him that quick? Or no, you've got to let that go and know that you need to, life is the most precious gift any of us ever have. And we have to live that precious gift, regardless of what challenges we've had, or traumas we've had, or deaths of loved ones. We need to remind ourselves that life is a precious gift and we need to live it.
We try to remind people too that healing does not mean forgetting our loved one. If anything, it's about remembering them well and being able to enjoy the happy memories. They'll always be part of us, always. And oftentimes people think it means I'm forgetting them. Yeah. If I try to heal, and it's such a disservice to them, because it's not true. How can you forget someone that you loved?
Right. I will say with this particular death, it's here's the other layer of that for us is that, and I might have mentioned it to you yesterday, that it took me 5 years before I could look at family photos. Mm-hmm. Right. And I had many. We had a wonderful, wonderful life. But because of the trauma and the image, when I tried to go to a place of remembrance, that would be the first thing that would pop up for me, was seeing him, or just the manner of death. And so it for people that have lost a loved one by suicide, it's difficult to want to remember them, because they're also the perpetrator. They're not just the victim, they're also the perpetrator. And that's another way that this death is different. Yeah. I've been, around others that are grieving, and, they want to sit with the photos. They want to, tell you stories. They want to, it's a little bit different with us, because especially if you've found a loved one that has died by suicide, it takes a while to let that image go. So
thank you for making that distinction. Again, something that I don't think I really would have thought of until you educated me, which is why I'm loving this conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about your healing journey? And before you do, I think you've made it clear, this is not something that people recover. When we talk about healing, I mean, it's not in 6 months, it's not a year later. So please, again, for those of you who can't even think about it, that is completely normal, right? So we just don't want you to feel like we're saying this is something quick that you bounce back from. But
grief is grief's a permanent roommate.
Yes.
And what healing,
your journey.
I chose to, take care of myself. And the first thing I absolutely did was jumped into professional counseling. I needed, some guidance. I needed a safe place to tell what my thoughts were. Aside from family members and friends, I needed that safe harbor, and certainly the guidance of a professional trained in how to help someone who's lost someone. And that was critical. We can't do that on our own. We can choose to do, but we can't do that on our own at all. I would highly recommend some sort of professional counseling. Certainly the retreat, a widow's retreat that I did, was hugely impactful. First time I was able to surround myself actually with other widows. And another layer of the suicide component. When I went into counseling, one of a bigger thing that I did was I read a book by Megan Devine, which is called It's Okay If You're Not Okay. And she had lost her partner to a tragic drowning accident. And she did some writing classes online and about grief. And one of her prompts to her students was, to personify grief. And, she explained that if you're writing a book and you've got a main character in your book or play, you need to know what they look like, what they eat, describe to your audience in your writing about this character. So the prompt was specifically write how grief introduced themselves to you. And I thought, wow. You mean write about the moment my world imploded? But it was fascinating to me. And so I sat down and started writing about, and I think in the book I talk about, I felt grief the first time I literally doubled over thinking, this is real. This is not a nightmare that I'm not going to wake up from. This is real. He's really gone. In those first few hours. But by personifying grief, I was able to make grief an entity. Instead of these emotions that were flowing in my heart, in my head, and my soul at hurricane speed, from guilt to anger to sadness and everything else in between, which is hard to articulate to anyone. I now had an entity. I put grief over here in another chair. And now I could have a conversation with grief. I could rage at grief. I could say how hideous grief is, and I don't want you here. I never wanted you here. I didn't invite you into my home. And grief was silent now. And let me do the talking. So personifying grief was great. And because I knew that grief was going to be my permanent roommate. Grief moved in, I knew I was never going to get over it, but I also knew I could get past it. And that's the goal, to get past it. Grief was always going to be with me, and I needed to learn from grief. Because truthfully, grief was the only entity that knew exactly how I felt at every moment, good or bad. And no one else around me knew that. So grief needed to be a teacher, and I let grief. So I capitalized grief in my book, because grief became
a name.
A name.
Yeah. It's the way you write to grief and personify it, like you said in your book. It's unique, and it's really powerful.
Yes,
very powerful.
Very helpful for me. It really was very helpful to, again, just kind of be able to bring all those emotions into one place, and then, one by one, try to deal with them. It was, I would just offer up to anybody, just try it, just write about it, try it that way. I have had some friends say that they never thought about that, and wow, let me think about that. Let me try that. It was helpful for me. May not be helpful for everyone, but perhaps it might be helpful for some.
Well, that's what we like too. We like to see, everybody has their own, just their grief experience is different, and their journey to healing can be different as well. And they find certain things that resonate with them. You had said yesterday, Marci, I'm sorry, I wrote so many things from our lunch yesterday. I'm like, oh, that's a good one. Write this, write that. But you said, embrace the change. Could you
Yeah.
talk about that just for a couple minutes?
Well, I had a great aunt. She was 100 years old, and upon her centennial birthday, I went to Texas, and they threw a big birthday party for her, and she was a great aunt. There was just a very wise woman, and she was also a widow. She had been a widow for 40 years, had chosen never to remarry, and like a kid, I sat on the floor next to her rocking chair at her 100th birthday, and she leaned into me, and she said, "Marci, you're going to be okay when you learn to embrace the change." And I thought a long time about that. What does she mean by that? And I came to realize that acceptance of what's happened is another huge component of the healing process. I have to accept. I can't replay it, rethink it, try to make it go away, but embrace it, and embrace it as part of who I am. It's not a bad thing at all. And I'm happy to have loved two men, but embracing that, yes, this is my story, and be able to talk about it. It gave me my power back in a situation where you're so powerless or you feel so helpless.
I think that's such a great description, the powerlessness, that you may feel, and you're so overwhelmed with just, there's so much, such a heaviness too. And you embrace the change. What I love about that is that oftentimes what we do is we run from our grief, right? We don't want to feel it. It's so painful. It's so hard. And we know that we see it all the time, that healing only comes from leaning into it, from allowing yourself to experience it. And it is hard. And you said it yourself, it's hard work. It's worth it. It's worth it, but it's hard, and you shouldn't do it alone. And I think that embracing, that's why I say embrace the emotions, lean into them, and then understanding that a devastating loss, especially your spouse, but any devastating loss, it changes your life circumstances, right? It does. So you're not going back to the way it was. And it also changes us. It has an impact on us. And so we recognize, Marci, you're not the same Marci. You still are Marci, and there's still a lot of you that's the same. But your experience with this loss has changed you.
I'm a better Marci.
I feel the same way.
And I've learned, gosh, it just sounds like a cliche. And I hate that. I hate, platitudes and cliches when you're talking about something so serious. But on the other hand, you hear people say when they've experienced something, that they do stop and smell the roses, or they, embrace life better. It's true, though. I mean, I've learned a lot. And I'm thankful for all of the lessons now, as hard as they were, as sad as they were. Would I have opted out of it every day? Like, please change this, but it's not going to change. But I'm a better Marci. I'm a wiser. I was compassionate to begin with, but I think I'm way more compassionate to more areas of pain for people. I'm accepting more, and I'm really more joyful than I've ever been in my life. Because when you've had that kind of loss, you are so grateful when those feelings of joy and love and happiness come right around the corner and they start staying. I was grateful to feel that way again. My heart was unburdened It wasn't so heavy.
Mhm.
And yet nothing's changed. My love for the one I lost is there. I have every memory. Those don't go away. And I have a great story to tell about great love and great sadness, but great, great wisdom that you find along your healing journey. That's something I didn't expect. I thought, okay, if I heal, I'm going to feel better again. But I didn't understand the level of of wisdom and joy and gratefulness
Mm.
that came with it. And I wouldn't trade that for anything at all.
I, I love that message. Thank you. And if anybody is watching where this is early on again in the loss, right? And they can't even fathom this, that's okay. But we are your hope. You know, we are your hope and your living proof. So just hang on to that,
Mhm.
you know, that your time can come.
I like to say to people, take that thought. You might not be able to embrace that kind of thinking right now. Take that thought and put it in your back pocket. And at some point, you're going to pull that out and you're going to begin to realize, wow, this is happening. For Marci to be able to say, I look back on it now and I have a certain gratitude even for it, or I wouldn't change it, it's an incredibly healthy attitude that goes along with you did not die that day
Right.
and you had a lot of life before you. And life, I think a lot of us look at it, it's a gift. And we don't want to squander that because despite even living to be 100, right?
Right.
That's a pretty long time. I don't know if I'm going to make that or not, but despite that, life is too short
Way too short.
to leave yourself in a particular chapter of your life and shut the book and
Mhm.
stop moving forward. You have a story that you're writing, a story to tell,
Mhm.
and no one can tell it but you.
Mhm.
And it happens because you live it.
Mhm.
It's funny you say take that thought and put it in your back pocket. That same great aunt that I was telling you about, the centurion, she used to say, well, why don't you just take that thought and put it in your basket and walk around with it for a bit?
I like hers
Oh,
better.
yeah, hers-
Hers is better.
She was a Texas woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, oh, those, you know, oh gosh, those are words of
Put it in
wisdom.
your
And,
basket.
you know, the thing that we want people to know too, when we talk about these, you know, the healing journey and all that, you were not meant to do this alone. This
No.
is a journey you have not been equipped for. We aren't prepared for. So be willing to take help. And there's lots of things in the program, all sorts of ways that we can get you support and things like that. They know that they can look, anyone who's watching this, but this is not a journey meant to be done alone. And healing isn't done alone either. So hold on to that. And I'd like to just kind of ask Marci, this is a kind of a neat way, I think, to segue into what Marci's life is like now and what the future holds for you and what that's like. Maybe you could share some little update with us.
Well, life is wonderful right now. I'm actually engaged. I just became engaged and will be married in November. I refused to let my heart die in August of 2013 and again in March of 2019. I didn't want my heart to die. I love loving someone and being loved by someone and marriage and all of that. I did that well, I think. And so I just, you know, I wasn't sure that love would ever come along again, that I would meet someone and have those type of feelings for them. But I kept my heart open to the possibility because again, I didn't die and And I also, I have 3 adult children and grandchildren and friends, and whether I chose to heal or not was going to lay witness to them.
Mm.
And I believe, life isn't always it doesn't always go the way you think it's going to go. And
Sure.
I had an opportunity to be a teaching moment. And yes, it is unfair, but you don't ever forget, but you can get past it. You absolutely can. And I wanted to get past it.
Mhm.
I didn't want to feel that way the rest of my life.
Right.
I wasn't satisfied with that.
That's a key. We believe it's one of the key things that help people get to that point where they're able to do some healing steps. It's like, I'm choosing this, right? I'm going to seek it when they're ready.
It's not, certainly moving forward, and to any person that's lost a spouse, I think, there are a lot of landmines or triggers ahead, and certainly, you're not just on that journey alone. Your children, your family believe that they're, in tow with you in your decision-making process as you go forward, especially as in relationships. And I've had some great experiences, and I've had some not great. Of course, again, another layer of the suicide component was, you share that information, and I've had I've had dates say, "Whoa, that's just too much pressure for the next one," or you just crazy things. But healing, I was not going to close my heart. And so here I am, engaged again to a wonderful man who knows everything. I handed him my manuscript and said, well, here, if you want to continue, you've got to know, the good and the bad. But life, I'm looking forward to life. It's too short. And as widows and a widower, we know that. Because it came way too short, as far as I'm sure all of us were concerned. We know that lesson.
Right.
And life absolutely is a gift. It's the most precious gift God's ever given us.
Wow. Well, look what you created out of your pain and your loss. This to me is using your pain for purpose.
Mm.
And that's part of healing too. And I know you feel really called.
Mm-hmm.
You really feel called to this cause and to changing the way people think about it and the message. And you do it so eloquently. And so passionately.
It's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. It is the second leading cause of death in ages 10 to 34. 10 to 34, the second leading cause of death in the United States today. In men 55 to 65, it's the 4th leading cause of death. It has grown 25% in the last 25 years in the United States. Something's wrong. It's an epidemic. We know what pandemics looks like, but this is an epidemic that is everyone, it seems we're too silent on, and our silence is killing people, and it's killing opportunities for healing and to get help that they need. And I just don't want to be silent anymore. And I'm asking those to join me. Don't be silent on the issue anymore. Don't be fearful of talking about people who have lost their lives to suicide. And I mean normal, everyday people. It's one thing when a celebrity dies, and for about a hot minute, it's on the news. But normal, everyday, wonderful, loving, caring, smart, intelligent people are dying by this method. 132 a day in the United States. And it's a death that can be prevented if we just get to a place where people feel comfortable in getting the help they need. So I'm asking everybody, just don't be silent anymore. Let them hear us.
I can't wait to see what the future holds for you. It's just just being in your presence. There's an energy, right? There's just an energy and that passion. And so the book is "And No One Saw It Coming." And how can people get it? I know it's on Amazon. Any other way to get it?
Yes, it's the Book Baby Shop is actually right now a better place to get it. You know, Amazon has its algorithms, and I'm self-published, and so I don't get quite as much weight on Amazon, but it is available there. Barnes and Noble, Target. It's available on Indiegram, and as I mentioned, Book Baby. And I'm hoping to make it available in some local bookstores and bookstores, across the country as quickly as I can. I want the message to get out. I'm willing to talk openly with those that need some help or want to know more, or even if they, really willing to speak to those that really kind of believe in those stigmas, because I'd like them to see what it looks like. And what feeling like that about suicide causes for people that are hurting. So I appreciate very much having the opportunity to give my story, and I appreciate and applaud the work that both of you are doing. It's so important. The healing method that both of you are invested in works. And I know it personally. I've been to a retreat, and I'm grateful that you're spending your lives and your pain in such a positive way for other people, because it. It's one thing to sit across the room with somebody that's never experienced something, but it's a whole different thing when they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I appreciate so much your work, and look forward to seeing what God has planned for you also. And how
So do we. And we have the same passion. And you, I believe, are a voice that is speaking for many.
Yes.
I really do. You're speaking for many, and you're representing people who need to be represented. So thank you for educating us and for sharing all of this.
Such a pleasure.
It is a pleasure. And
Thank
we
you.
look forward to doing lunch again.
Okay.
Great.
Better.
The wedding.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you.